Okay, so we're going to pick up where we left off in the first video. I'm trying to make these videos short enough to where you can watch them in a session and not lose your train of thought. Okay, so we're going to pick up with we were talking about Romanesque painting. This and sorry about the cut. I wasn't expecting it to cut there, but it cut out on me. Um, this image is of Hildegard of Bingen, and she was a famous nun who lived during this time period, and she was supposedly endowed with this gift of visions. And in her visions, in her the state of having a vision, she would draw images that were then on a tablet that were then interpreted by a priest, and the priest actually wrote about her visions, and then they created these illuminations based upon the visions that she had. And so some of them are about her, some of these illuminations are, and then some of them are inspired by the visions that she claims to have had. Now, in her visions, she was supposedly visited by Mary and the mother of Jesus. And in her visions, Mary talked about what she, saw right and wrong with the world. She gave messages from Jesus. She gave, and this was a common thing in the time period. It was not uncommon for people to claim to have been visited by Mary, people to claim to have been visited by various other figures, angels and saints, and they would then what that did was the places and sites where those visitations and those visions and those things were supposed to have happened became important religious sites. And so, all throughout Europe, there are churches built at or around the sites where these events were supposed to have taken place. And this is the case here. So these images are images illustrating some of the visions that Hildegard was supposed to have had, where Mary spoke to her about the morality and immorality of the world, where Mary spoke to her about Christ in his second coming and how terrible that would be for the world if we didn't choose to believe. Now, the other important art form from the time period, and it's a new art form, are reliquaries. A reliquary is a sculpture that houses a relic, and a relic is an object. There's lots of different kinds of relics, and we'll get to that in a minute. But it's an object that's supposed to have holy power, and very often it is either an actual part of the body of a saint, or it's an object that belongs to a saint, or it's some object that's supposed to have some sort of power. Okay, now these relics very often are physical parts of the bodies of saints, like what we're seeing here. This is the head of Saint Alexander, and his skull was removed from his body and enclosed in this reliquary after his death, and it's still in there. And now these relics and reliquaries became important during the time period because the people believed that that the relics themselves had the power through that saint, that if a believer touched the relic or reliquary even and prayed to that saint for intercession or help, depending upon the saint, that they might pass that prayer on. They're in heaven. They might pass that prayer on to Jesus, and he might be more willing to heal the sick or to provide an answer or to give the person, the believer, what they wanted. And if nothing else, it was a blessing. So these relics became not only popular, but they also became um, you know, objects and commodities in their own right. Relics were bought and sold. Relics were stolen sometimes. And the objects that housed the relics, the sculpture itself, the reliquary, was itself a collectible. It was an art object. So this image here that houses the skull of Saint Alexander is in itself a sculpture and an important art object. That most of the time these were made with precious or semi-precious metals and stones and jewels. They are decorated on the exterior in a variety of different ways and styles. And these relics, some of them we know to be true and accurate because we know the direct provenance of the object inside. And some of them we pretty sure the church rounded up a bunch of them, but pretty sure that they're not accurate, that they're not real. Some that we can't prove one way or the other. There are relics that supposedly date back to the time of Christ and beyond, further back into Christianity. There are relics that are supposedly wood from the cross, for instance, or relics. Probably the most famous of all the relics is the burial cloth that supposedly was used to inter the body of Jesus. It's called the Shroud of Turin, and it's at a church in Turin, Italy. And the church these days is a little bit torn about the nature of these relics. Some they're pretty sure they're not original, and it's a part of their past that is a part of their history, and it's important now. But it's not something that the church fully embraces because they, like a lot of people see this as interesting, as kind of hearkening back towards paganism, and that's really ultimately what it is. It's a Christian version of pagan idol worship almost. And so, at least that's the point of view of a lot of people who disagree with this practice. And even people within the church at the time didn't all agree that this was a healthy practice for Christians to engage in. The reliquaries over time got more and more elaborate. So it wasn't just about the quality of the relic itself, it was about the quality and craftsmanship and artistry of the object, the sculpture that houses the relic. This is solid gold. Well, it's solid in that there's an interior for the relic itself, but it's very heavy and it's very ornate, and it's very elaborate, the design and construction of this reliquary. But this is just one of thousands of relics and reliquaries all over Europe. And so what you see in a lot of churches are, and even today, this photograph was taken in Spain from just a few years ago, that the relics are still there. There are these bones that you see inside these reliquaries are all the arm bones of saints, supposedly. And for a small offering on the right feast day, the local priest will pick up the reliquary and bless you with it. And the object itself has become historical, but it's also still in practice. This is still art and objects that are in use today. These are some of the slightly more macabre relics. These are, in these reliquaries are teeth, skin, and hair from various saints. Now, in the 12th century and into the 13th century, the church discouraged officially the practice of relics and rounded up the ones that they were relatively certain were not real. But it's kind of hard to know what's real and what's not. And there's no DNA testing. There's no dating that's really going to help narrow the time period that was available to them. And so they basically had to go on their best guess in terms of the history of who that person was and when they lived, and was it even possible that this relic could have belonged to them. So that ends Northern Romanesque, and now in the next video we'll move into English and Italian Romanesque, and we'll look at that.